Dear students, welcome to IOL PowerPoint presentations for Social Sciences Module 1. I'm Dinela Motuanaha, your tutor. You can contact me. There are my contact details, 08161949945, and the email address at nelaumoto@gmail.com. Welcome to the Social Science Module 1. This module consists of 5 sections, namely Methodologies, Namibian History, African History, World History, and Geography section. So, the presentation will cover all 3 exams that will be conducted in May, August, and November 2022. Each question paper will cover 130 marks, and you are expected to answer all questions. So in teaching methodologies, you would expect the following: different teaching methods used in history. So this one are the teaching methods a history teacher expects to use. The efficient teaching methods used by history teachers whenever conducting their history lessons. And you would also require to know the elements of learner-centered education. Here you are not expected to define what learner-centered education is all about, but you are asked to give elements. What are the criteria? What is that learner-centered education entitled of? So as a history teacher, whenever you are conducting your lessons, you are expected to plan your lesson. So you are also here expected to know the lesson plan components. What do I mean by lesson plan components? You should know what is that is made up of a lesson plan. It's not only to know that it consists of learning objectives, but you should be able to explain what that learning objectives is all about. So that goes on with the rest of the components. You should also know the advantages of pair work. So this is not a group work. Pair work is not group work. Pair work, it's different from group work. Pair means 2. What is that is good whenever you are engaging your learners into working into pairs? Right? Should also expect to know the characteristics of a good history teacher. What is that the history teacher comprises of that makes him or that makes her be a good history teacher? So that is, in short, what you are expected to know. And you should also know the maps. It's not maps, it's maps, posters, or different teaching aids that a history teacher uses in teaching and learning, and their influence to conducive environment. What do I mean by this? How does posters, maps, it's not maps, but maps, and the rest of the teaching and learning aids that a history teacher uses in conducting his or her classes or lessons, how are those making it possible for conducive learning and teaching environment? You're also expected to know the multicultural learners. So, what is that that a history teacher should know when dealing with learners from different cultural background? So that is what multicultural means. So in Namibian history, you are expected now to know the SWAPO. Know that SWAPO stands for an abbreviation. That is an abbreviation that stands for Southwest African People's Organization, and how it got itself involved in an armed struggle. Here I would like you to know the difference between armed struggle and liberation struggle. So an armed struggle is when SWAPO decided to take up arms. So what are the reasons for SWAPO taking up arms? But not liberation. Take note of that. There's a difference between liberation and armed struggle. Okay? You should also know reasons for rejecting the 10 Hull Constitution. So remember, first they held a 10 Hull conference. As a result, they came up with after the conference, they came up with a 10 Hull Constitution. So as a result, towards the end of the conference that was held, so the group came up with a constitution. So now, you should be able to give reasons why SWAPO, United Nations Organization, and the OAU should know the reasons why these three groups rejected the 10 Hull Constitution. You are also required to know the fundamental human rights. So the fundamental human rights, these are the rights that we can find in the Namibian Constitution. You'll be able, if you have a Namibian Constitution, you'll be able to find out or to have known what the fundamental, not just any right, but the fundamental human rights. You are also requested to know the event of 1959, 10th of December, which is Windhoek Massacre. So you are expected to know exactly what is the massacre. That is one thing that students do not get to know. You should know what the massacre is. If you want to score more marks, you should know what the massacre is. You should know when it happened. You should know the reason why it happened. You should know how it happened. And the last thing here, you should know the consequences. What happened after this event? And apart from that Windhoek Massacre, you should also know the resolution 435. What is it all about? What are the points? In another word, what are the terms? What is resolution 435 entitled of? You should also know ELOC, referendum, and the open letter. Many a times students confuse between the ELOC referendum, open letters, and pastoral. More especially when you are given open and pastoral. In this time, please, dear students, do not confuse between these three. And in this time, we are only given ELOC referendum in the open letter. So a referendum, you should know that it's a matter of stating whether you are for or against. And remember, this is when the South African government gave an opportunity to Bishop Leonard Awala to find out whether the Namibian people were for or against. So now you should be able to know how the Namibian people would have felt or thought about this ELOC referendum. And as a result of the ELOC referendum, so Bishop Leonard Awala decided to print out the results of the ELOC referendum in what is known as the open letter. So you should also find out how the Namibian people would have felt. If it was you, how would you have felt or thought about open letter? And you should also know what an open letter is all about or was all about. And the next thing you should know is the independent churches. Independent churches, they were called independent churches because they stood independently from the mission churches. So these churches were taken, so they came out of mission churches. You should know the reason why black pastors, black Namibians, have decided to leave the mission churches and came up independently to establish their own churches that were called independent churches, as well as know who were the independent churches. You should know, and their leaders. The last point you should know in Namibian history is the contract labor system and its effects on the Namibian people. So here you are expected to know what the contract labor system was all about and how it affected the Namibian people. So you should differentiate between the effects it had on the workers themselves and also the effects the contract labor system had on the lives of the Namibian people at large. So in African history, you should know the Pan-Africanism. So knowing Pan-Africanism, not just defining it, but you should also know the aims. So this is the reason why Pan-Africanism was established, and also where it was originated from. You should know the OAU, the Organization for African Unity, by knowing what is made up of. So that is knowing the structure, the bodies that made up this OAU. You should know the aims of the OAU. Why was it established? You should be able to know, name and explain those aims, and also knowing the successes and the failures. By knowing the successes and the failures, you'll be able to indicate how the Namibian people, the African people would have felt or thought about the establishment of this Organization of African Unity. And don't forget, this is what is known today as the African Union, in short, AU. You are also expected to know the economic crisis in Africa and the measure to combat it. A crisis is an ongoing problem. So many a times, students get confused of economic crisis and economic systems. So a crisis, remember, a crisis is an ongoing problem. So what are the causes to the crisis in Africa? What is there that is bringing crisis, economic problem in Africa? And how is it that African countries are overcoming? To combat is to overcome the problems. So in short, you must be able to know the problems that are affecting African economies. That's why it's called economic crisis. So it's problems that are affecting African economies. It's an ongoing problem. And how the African leaders are trying to combat or to overcome these problems. The forms of governments in Africa. So, for example, you are given an example here, it's democracy. Many a times students also get confused of forms of government with economic systems or economic crisis. Forms of government is on a political side of the country. So this, you are given an example like democracy. So you are not only expected to know examples, but you should also be able to explain what democracy, for example, is all about, and how would African people would have felt or thought about it. You must be able to give the advantages and disadvantages of each forms of government. And the last point that you have to know is economic systems in Africa. So the economic systems, we have capitalist, socialist, and when you combine the two, then it gives you a mixed economic system. So by looking at those economic systems, you must be able to know what happened. You should be able to give examples of countries in Africa who have practiced it. For example, what type of economic system is Namibia having? You must be able to know, since it's your country. And what are the advantages and disadvantages of having that mixed economic system? So same applies to countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia. You must be able to know where these economic systems were practiced. And Lagos Plan was supposed to be the last point here. Lagos Plan. This is one way African nations have combated their problems. So it goes in hand with the economic crisis, a way of overcoming it. But it's not the only one. It's the rest. There are also other ways how these African countries overcame their economic problems. Okay, welcome to World History. The most problematic but easiest. It's just that students never pay attention to it. So in the world history, you must know the agencies. One of the agencies of the United Nations organizations. Most of the time, you'll be asked when the World Bank and the IMF were established. So if you exactly know when the United Nations was established, then you would already find out that the following year after the establishment of the United Nations, these agencies, because these are the branches of the United Nations organization. So exactly by 1945, that's when this World Bank and the IMF came into being. So these two, we cannot separate them. That's why we have them two, World Bank and the IMF, because they work hand in hand with one another. So you should know what the World Bank offers to the people in the world, particularly in Africa, and also the IMF. So IMF stands for International Monetary Fund. And the bank, many a times students confuses this bank with the local banks that we have. you find out the person referring to World Bank as FNB, like where you get a loan of building a house, which is wrong. It's not so. This is an international bank where countries come, receive some, before they get the money, they get financial advice from the IMF. That's why I'm telling you that these two, they work hand in hand. And then after they receive the money, then they have now to, after they receive the advice, they have to receive the money now. Because the advice they must be advised on how to run or how to spend that money. So you must be able to know exactly how would a country would have felt or thought about this, receiving an assistance. There are also some programs attached to it. Find out what benefits do these countries get from this IMF as far as its programs are concerned, the structural adjustment programs of the IMF and the World Bank. So we have the fascism and its effect on Italian people. Fascism is from the word fascist, the party introduced by Benito Mussolini in Italy. So now find out how this party was established in Italy and how this leader Benito Mussolini dealt with people in Italy. So like just any other person, no one is perfect. So there must be some advantages and disadvantages of this party. So find out, so by evaluating the effect it had on the Italian people. And this does not only applies to the Italian people, because it also affected people in the world, in Europe at large. So find out what effect the fascist party had on the Italians as well as on the Europeans at large. So we have the United Nations organization. You should know the structure. Knowing the structure, these are the bodies that made up now the whole United Nations organizations. So knowing the bodies does not only mean you should mention them, but you should as well know the functions of these bodies. We also have a party by Hitler, a well-known man in the world, to the Nazi Party. Find out about this ideology of the Nazi Party. And this does not get away from Hitler's foreign policy, because what he wrote, the aims of Nazi Party, the ideas of Nazi Party, is also what we have. It also goes in hand with Hitler's foreign policy. In the world history, again, you should know the Southern African Development Community, which is in short SADC. What do we need to know about SADC? We should know the aims. Why was SADC established? Why was SADC formed? When was SADC formed or established? Who are the member states of SADC? And what are the responsibilities of those member states of SADC? So that is in short what you are expected to know. And the last one in the world history is communism in China. What is it that you should know about communism? First, you should know what communism is all about. Then you should know the features. There are 3 distinct features of communism. And as well as knowing how it was practiced in China. So now, the way it was practiced in China, some people benefited from it, as well as some people did not benefit, did not like it. So you should also evaluate this communism by looking at its disadvantages and advantages, the way it was practiced in China. So this includes the 5-year plans, everything that was practiced in China under this communism. All right. Social science 1.1 has got the geography part. So in geography, you must know the following: the synoptic weather maps and the charts. This is where you get to have weather symbols. You must be able to interpret the weather maps in symbols, and also you must be able to interpret, to fill in the charts or interpret also the data from the charts. Weather interpretations, this is where you have, it goes in hand with the synoptic weather maps and the charts. So you must be able to interpret the weather symbols. So for example, when you are looking in the map, what symbol does hail, what symbol would you be looking at when you want to find out whether there was hail or snow, or is it thunderstorms? How do you interpret those weather maps? We have weather elements and the instruments. You must be able to know the weather elements. Weather elements, we have temperature, rainfall, etc. And you must also be able to know what instruments, for example, what is the instrument being used to measure what? Rainfall. So you must be able to know all the weather elements and the instruments used to measure those weather elements. So in geography as well, you should know how to calculate the mean. So you'll be given some figures, then you'll be asked to calculate the mean. You must find out the formulas of calculating the mean in geography, calculating the range, calculating the average, finding out the annual temperature, for example. How do you calculate all these calculations that we do in geography? And the last one in geography, you must be able to know the plate tectonics. In short, that is what we call the plate movements. So you must be able to identify those plates. How do we call the plates that are moving in the same direction? How do we call those plates that are moving towards one another? So you must be able to know. We call this one, for example, and you should also be able to know what is that forms after two plates are moving towards each other. What is that is forming after when the plates are moving past one another, for example? So all this, you must be able to, anything that has to do with the plate tectonics or plate movement, you must be able to know about it. Those subductional zone, how volcanoes erupt, these are results of this plate movement or plate tectonics. So let's move on to the general principles of answering this paper. So when you are asked, if you are asked to write a paragraph, for example, make sure that you write a paragraph in a paragraph form. So a paragraph, what is a paragraph? A paragraph, something that starts with a capital letter, In between we have commas. You know, the sentence does not end with a comma. It always ends with a full stop. So at least if you are asked to write the paragraph, you should look at the marks allocated for that particular paragraph. So if the paragraph has got 10 marks, then it means that you must mention at least 10 points. But those points must not be a repetition of one another. It must be concrete. It must be valid points to score all 10 marks. So start your sentence with a capital letter and punctuate your statements just like what I've said from the beginning. So if you are asked about how people felt about something, most of the time we have these questions like, for example, what did Namibian people think about, for example, the contract labor system? So make sure that you indicate that people, because people always have different feelings. People always have different or mixture feelings. So you must always indicate people felt differently. Then you have to indicate reasons, counting the points or the marks allocated for that specific question. You must give at least 4 or 5 reasons to support the one that have felt good, to support the good side. Because if you say they are feeling differently, then you must indicate some felt good. Then you must at least provide 4 or 5 reasons to support the good side. And as well, in the same manner, you must also provide 4 to 5 reasons to support those who have felt bad. So consider, in any ways, whenever you're asked about how people felt about something, consider the advantages and disadvantages of that particular thing or event or something. So remember, nothing is perfect. No one is perfect. So there's always some reasons for criticism. If you are asked about the structure of an organization, for example, the structure of United Nations organization, for example, the structure of the OAU, for example, don't forget to give those bodies function. For example, the General Assembly of the United Nations organization. What is that? What is the function of general? What is the General Assembly made up of? So at least don't just give the body, but here the examiner wants you to give what, for example, consists of or the functions of that particular body. General principles continue. For the geography part, where you are asked to show some calculations, you have to indicate, you have to show to the examiner how you get to that answer. So you have to show all your workings. So you must show all your calculations where necessary. So remember to answer all questions. Most of the time, we find or we see students leaving blank spaces. At least if you try to write something, you never know. That's something that you have thought of. It might be the answer. So never leave any blank spaces during the examination. Try to answer all the questions. So this is the end of Social Sciences 11. Good luck in your preparations of the examination. I wish you all the best.